Welcome to episode 64 of the MMA Rundown podcast. And what was on a rather weak card all the way up until the main event, we had a fight between two top five lightweights. And not only was it a good fight just because we had two high-level fighters there, but we had just a tremendous fight between the two of them. Really good back-and-forth fight that Dustin Poirier was able to win. So I'll recap that fight. I'll then recap the entire card, talk about the whole situation with Mike Perry in his corner, because there are a lot of thoughts that have to go into that go beyond just recapping what happened in that fight with Mickey Gall. Talk about a weird little controversy from last week where Don House, one of the Cutmen, was wearing QAnon patches, and Mark Raimondi of ESPN and Kareem Zidane of Bloody Elbow went after him on that. So I'll talk about what happened in that situation and my thoughts on it. There was a weird story that popped up in the middle of the week where Geoff Neal had done an interview with James Lynch and had mentioned that he was go back to working at a restaurant, and that was misconstrued in a way, and it made it sound as though the UFC was underpaying a top 11 or like a top 15 welterweight so badly that he has to serve at a steakhouse in order for him to keep paying his bills. So I'll recap that story and some of the misconceptions around it. Talk about Max Rohskopf. He did an interview since last week, and Robert Drysdale has been interviewed as well, so I'll just recap what's happened since then. A few grappling storylines to cover. So for wrestling, there were some big transfers, but the biggest one was Sebastian Rivera going from Northwestern to Rutgers, so I'll talk about that. Talk about the Miyao brothers, Paulo and Joao, leaving Unity in New York. I'm not entirely sure where they're going right now, but that's a really big story within the jiu-jitsu community. Both brothers, Paulo and Joao, are both world champions at the black belt level and have been really good up until that point as well. So this is definitely big news. And then the last thing to talk about is just going to be recapping some results over the weekend. So the third Coast Grappling Kumite, that was run by Roberto Jimenez, coming either 1 or 2 weeks after he made it to the finals at Submission Underground. And then I'll at least talk about one match from Fight to Win, which was the Gary Tonin versus Kishinyo match. So back to the top, we have Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier. And this fight, in some ways, it kind of went how I expected, but in other ways it didn't. And I think the biggest thing that caught me off guard here was how good Dan Hooker's chin was. It's not as though I haven't seen Dan Hooker take a big shot before, but just the number of shots within succession that he was able to take and just keep walking forward, like it didn't bother him, was just shocking. And one of the things I mentioned when I was previewing this fight is that Hooker keeps his hands down a lot. His boxing is okay, at least offensively, in terms of him being able to find shots and land combinations. But defensively, there's definitely a lot of work to be done there, and I felt as though Poirier was going to take advantage of that and land some heavy shots on him. And he was, but it just wasn't bothering Hooker, and he just kept going forward, at least early on. So what we were seeing early on is Hooker was having a lot of success with the hands, and that he would just kind of march forward, throw just massive combinations, 5, 6 punches, sometimes even more than that, take some shots as he's coming in, but he wouldn't even be deterred. Like, it's not as though Poirier wasn't landing some big shots that would push off most other guys, but for whatever reason, Hooker was able to take him and just keep walking forward like it wasn't even bothering him. And so as a result, he was able to be pretty effective in those early rounds. Like I mentioned before, his knees are really a big weapon for him, but I didn't figure that Poirier was going to do much to lower his posture and really put himself in danger there. Now, granted, at the end of the second round, while Poirier was up against the fence and getting hit to the body and to the head, Hooker was able to land a pretty nice knee that Poirier later admitted kind of rocked him. But fortunately for Poirier, sort of in a way, it kind of reminds me of the Ferguson versus Gaethje fight, in that the guy who lost the fight had his opponent hurt pretty bad at the end of a round, but unfortunately, time ran out. The guy had a minute to recover and then came back stronger. So for Poirier, he was able to come back stronger there. Now, I thought what was interesting in this fight is that, at least in the first couple rounds, it was mostly on the feet, and it looked as though Hooker won both of those rounds. Now, granted, the second round was closer than the first, up until he had him hurt late. But it seemed as though Hooker's thought process was if he can steal some takedowns in the third round, kill some time, he can do enough to win that round and put himself up 3-0, at which point, as long as he doesn't get finished, he's going to win the fight. I don't know that I disagree with that idea, but I thought it was kind of unusual that he was trying to take the fight to the ground. It's not as though when he did have it to the ground, when he did have it down there, that he was super successful. He had to deal with some tough guillotine choke attempts that he was able to get out of, but had to struggle to get out of those. And once he was on top, it's not like he was landing like major ground and pound. It's not like he was passing Poirier's guard. It was just doing enough to sort of win for the period of time that he was up there. But it's not as though he was like making much progress towards getting to a finish or anything like that. But Poirier, who in his last camp was working on getting up off the ground, did a decent job of getting up in this fight. It's not as though every time that his butt hit the mat, he was instantly back up, but he was doing a good job of scooting back to the fence and then working his way back up from there. So every time Hooker would go through all the energy of taking him down, which isn't really Hooker's thing, he wouldn't really get a whole lot from being on top, but he would use a lot of energy trying to secure the takedown, get out of a guillotine, and then keep Hooker down or keep Poirier down. I don't think that was the best thing for him. Usually, if you have one background that you're better at than another, generally you're going to be more efficient with your energy in that area. So like for a grappler, for example, and I guess if you've done jiu-jitsu, you can understand there's some times where you do jiu-jitsu where you're rolling with someone and you feel okay, and then you stand up and start walking around, and all of a sudden you feel gas. It's like, what the hell is this? Like, I felt fine when I was on the mat. Like, sometimes if you're more used to being in one area, whether that's on the feet or whether that's on the ground, depending on your background, you can be more efficient depending on where you're at. And I feel like for Hooker, a guy who's definitely a much better striker than he is a grappler, it might have been better for him to spend a little bit more time on the feet. I get the idea of what he was doing, that he was trying to steal that third round and then be able to just hang in there for the next two, but the execution wasn't quite there, and after it didn't work in the third round, it seemed like he kept trying to make that same exact game plan work later on. It was only tiring himself out more. It's exhausting to try to keep taking someone down. It's exhausting to have to fight your way out of guillotines, and it's exhausting when every time you take them down that they're just working their way back up immediately, and you kind of feel like, oh my god, I did all that work, and what do I have to show for it? And with Hooker looking as tired as he did at the end of the fight, I would definitely say that that was a big reason why, is that he was using his energy in a pretty inefficient manner later on in the fight, trying to steal rounds with takedowns. And that just seemed kind of odd to me, especially in the fifth round where he was still like pushing for some lazy shots. It seemed as though, given how that fight had been going to that point, it would make more sense for him to just try to like fight behind his jab, try to kick from range, and just sort of pick Poirier apart and sort of kill time that way and sort of get his breath back that way, rather than trying to take him down and hopefully stall enough for him to catch his breath. So that didn't exactly work for him. So he ends up losing the third round, even though he had those takedowns early. Fourth round doesn't go much better for him. Fifth round definitely doesn't go good for him at all. And at that point, Poirier was able to get the win, got his hand raised, and is now pretty much in the same position he was before. I don't see him really jumping up in the rankings. I think he's still going to be number 3. But that secures him where he's at. Puts him probably in another fight away from looking at another title fight, depending on how timing works out. It also puts him in a position to take a pretty big fight. So at this point, a lot of people are talking about him versus Tony Ferguson. Both of those guys got beat up pretty bad in their last fight. Poirier's going to need some time to recover. Ferguson, I don't know where he's at right now in his recovery. So I don't know how soon they can make that fight. There's also a possibility that if Conor McGregor's next fight isn't for a title, if it's not against Gaethje or Khabib, then maybe you can give him Poirier. And Dustin's done enough recently for there to be the argument that this version of Poirier is much better than the version that Conor knocked out in the first round. And then for Conor, maybe it gives him some confidence knowing that he's already knocked out Poirier, that maybe he can do it again. So it'll be interesting to see where each of these fighters goes from here. For Hooker, I don't think he's really going to drop in the rankings too far. He proved that he belongs in there with some of the best guys, especially against guys who are going to keep it on the feet. Some of the better grapplers are definitely going to give him some problems. But for the most part, this fight was very competitive on the feet. Hooker, I mean, he won the first 2 rounds primarily striking, so he shows that he belongs here. So you got to give him respect for that. I don't know who you're going to give him next. I think you kind of have that same issue where he was just in a war. You don't want to rush him back. So you're probably going to have some other fights at the top of the division happen in the meantime. Let those results sort themselves out and then see where to go from there. Maybe Charles Oliveira is the guy you give him, but I feel like Oliveira, he fought in March. I don't think he has an opponent right now. I don't think he's going to want to wait until Dan Hooker's ready to go again. But if he is, that's definitely a fight that could be made. Co-main event on the card was Mike Perry versus Mickey Gall. Kind of surprised that Mickey Gall was able to take a round in this fight. I'll talk more about Mike Perry's corner later on, but to be fair, I was impressed with Mickey Gall, particularly his striking in this fight. Like I said in the preview, I just haven't been that impressed with Mickey Gall to this point in his career. My read on him is that he's a good jiu-jitsu player. He's came in as a brown belt. I think he's a black belt now, but his wrestling isn't very good. His striking was never really that good. So it was one of those things where it's like at welterweight, there are a lot of really, really good jiu-jitsu guys. I mean, you had a guy like Sergio Moraes, for example, who was a black belt world champion, and he's no longer in the UFC just because of how good the other guys in the division have been and how tough those matchups are for him. So you figure with a guy like Mickey Gall, who recently got his black belt, or maybe still have his brown belt, I'm not exactly sure where he's at. If he does have his brown belt at this point, I think his skill set's probably at a black belt level, but maybe he's just been training Nogi. I don't know what the case is there, but either way, he's not at the level of a Sergio Moraes. Never mind the fact that Mickey Gall's wrestling just is practically non-existent, and his striking just hasn't been that good. But in this first round, his striking actually did look pretty good. He did a really good job of sticking and moving. Perry was coming in with his hands down a lot. Gall was able to land 1 or 2 shots and just get out of the pocket, circle away right after landing. He didn't set his feet, land those shots, and then have to take some other shots on the way or take some other shots as he was pulling his hands back. It was just he'd land his shots, he'd circle out of there, and he'd be okay. And Perry had to eat some pretty heavy shots there in that round. So for Mickey Gall, looked pretty good in that first round. Perry was starting to get his reads on Gall over time, and obviously that came into fruition later on where Perry was able to drop him and give him some more problems on the feet. But from a striking standpoint, I got to say I was surprised, in a good way, surprised where Mickey Gall was at in this fight. Now, he still didn't show great cardio in the second and third round, so that's still going to be a problem for him. With him, it's tough to tell whether that's just he doesn't work out hard enough or whether that's one of those things where maybe he just gets a little nervous as the fight goes on. It's not exactly clear why cardio has been such an issue for him recently, but he definitely looked pretty tired out there, and it showed in the later rounds, and that's how Perry was able to get a jump on him. But another thing that I found interesting in this fight is that Mike Perry, who's a pretty good purple belt, decided that rather than just keeping this on the feet the entire time, he'd also mix in takedowns, and he would also look to win this fight from top. And he was successful with that strategy. Didn't necessarily need to pass Mickey Gall's guard or like take his back. He did take his back at one point, but he didn't have to like do that necessarily. But for him, just getting on top and winning the rounds from top position was something that he found as an effective strategy. And it's kind of interesting that for Mickey Gall, with him having his strength in jiu-jitsu, if you look at some of the losses he's had, whether it's been Randy Brown, Diego Sanchez, or now even Mike Perry, you're finding guys who are saying, yeah, I know he's a jiu-jitsu guy, but his jiu-jitsu is not even like at a level where I have to be concerned about taking him down. So they're still taking him down, even though that's his best area, and still beating him in that area. So did Mickey Gall look impressive relative to what I've seen from him in the past in this fight? Definitely. Is he UFC caliber? That's sort of hard to say. I guess the more time you give him, the better he's going to get, and at some point he really will be at that UFC caliber. But at this point, he's had some weird wins. Pretty much everyone who's beaten isn't in the UFC anymore, whether it's Mike Jackson and CM Punk, or maybe even some more legit wins like that Salim guy, or Sage Northcutt. So for Perry, this was a fight where you kind of figured that something really bad would have to happen for him to lose it, just because he's a better fighter than Mickey Gall. The fact that Gall won the first round was pretty surprising, but Perry did make some adjustments that he had to. Was in better shape than Gall and was able to win the fight in the later rounds. Next fight on the card was a really bad and bizarre one between Jean Vellante and Maurice Green. Not exactly exciting in the first round. It looked as though Vellante was just waiting for Green to throw first, and Vellante was trying to counter with one shot over the top. Wasn't really finding his spots. Was a little bit more aggressive in the second round, especially with his leg kicks. Was finding some success with that, but I think he did break his foot at the end of the first round, so that sort of limited his options. In the third round, lands a big overhand, sort of off of the plan that he was going off in the first, where he was trying to time a counter from Maurice Green, but dropped him. Looked as though he was getting close to getting a finish, wasn't able to do so. And then from there, sort of like got caught in this position where he was just trying to recover the entire time, which was weird because Maurice Green's half guard was wide open the entire time. It would have been really easy for Jean Vellante to slide into mount there. Don't know why he didn't. If his thought process was that he could be more secure from top of half guard, because at least there, in wrestling terms, you can kind of like turk the leg and keep the guy down that way. Or I just don't know what his thought process was, but he never really tried to pass. Eventually, Maurice Green goes for what now, after watching it a few times, what appeared to be an arm triangle choke from bottom. At least that's how the grip worked out. It didn't look like there was a ton of pressure on the shoulder side, but with that being said, Vellante just kind of hung in there for a little bit and then tapped out, and it just didn't look like it was all that tight. It also looked like Maurice Green's half guard was still passable at that point. So looked as though Vellante should have been able to get out of there. It was bizarre that he got caught in the first place. Didn't even seem super tight, but I guess at that point Vellante was gassed, and when you're gassed, just a little bit of pressure from a choke can feel a lot worse than it actually is. And I think to an extent that sort of played a role in the Hooker versus Poirier fight, where Hooker was tired already and he'd have to deal with Dustin Poirier's guillotines, and even though he'd get out, it would still take a lot of energy, and it just wouldn't be comfortable to have a squeeze around your neck. But Hooker didn't actually tap when he didn't have to, whereas Vellante kind of looked like he tapped when he didn't have to, and in a way it sort of appeared like he gave up. But it was just a really bizarre way for it to end there, because it seemed like he could have gotten to mount, could have gone to a much better position, could have found a way to get a finish there, and rather than that, he's just hanging from top and gets caught with a weird arm triangle from bottom of half guard. That's not to say that you can't get that submission from there. There definitely are ways to catch arm triangles from there. There's ways to catch dart strokes from there. I've caught a dart stroke a couple times from bottom of half where it'll be a kind of a similar position, although usually they'll kind of turn their back, and then you can just kind of like slide underneath, get your forearm on one side of the neck, and then just like pull in really tight if you can. It's sort of like a feel one, just because the way that the choke works, one carotid artery you're going to be blocking with your forearm, the other one that they have to kind of block with their own shoulder. So you have to get the pressure just right where their shoulder is pushing in. If you get it at the wrong angle, you're not going to get it. But if you do get it right, you can definitely get a tight squeeze in there and actually like get a legit choke. So it's not like you can't get a legit choke from bottom of half guard, but those are pretty rare. And based off what I saw with this one, this didn't look like it was super tight and inescapable. It just kind of looked like Vellante was exhausted, had to face a little adversity there and just decided to tap out, and it just wasn't a good finish for him. I think at this point for John, he's going to have to get himself back into shape. He just did not look good in this fight. Apparently the quarantine hasn't gone that well for him, but I think for him, he's kind of going to have to get back into the shape he was at back when he was at 205. And once he finally is, maybe just send a message over to Sean Shelby and be like, hey, I'm actually taking this serious now. You can bring me back. But that was a rough performance from him. And it was just crazy that as bad as that performance looked, as bad as he looked on the scales, he still almost had a shot at winning this by TKO. Fight before that, we had Brendan Allen versus Kyle Daukaus. This was a really good fight. I've been pretty high on Brendan Allen. I'm trying to get an idea of where I think he's going to fit in, but I do think he's a guy who's good enough to get ranked at middleweight for sure. Definitely make it in the top 15. I'm not exactly sure how high I think his ceiling is, but he's really good. A 24-year-old Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, really heavy top pressure, really good ground and pound. His striking's decent, but it's been getting better over time, and he's had a pretty good camp to improve that striking. So I figured with him, he's one of these guys where I figured going into this fight, and I didn't know a ton about Daukaus, but I knew that he was more of a grappler than a striker. I kind of figured that Allen would sort of run through him here. It's not as though Allen looked bad in this fight as much as I was impressed with Kyle Daukaus. So Daukaus is definitely a legit guy as well. Really good back and forth fight. Definitely 2 rounds to 1. That third round going to Brendan Allen on that one judge's scorecard, which is absolutely ridiculous. Daukaus was able to take the back and was threatening with chokes for most of the time. Yes, Allen got out with like 30 seconds left and was able to land a few shots from top, but that's not enough to steal the round. But either way, really good back and forth fight. It's not as though I'm any lower on Brendan Allen than I was before. Maybe I don't see him as like a guy who's going to break into the top 5 anytime soon, but I'm still impressed with Brendan Allen, but it definitely impressed me with Kyle Daukaus as well. I'm really interested to see him fight. I know Allen had a few different breaks in his face. I think there was like a break in the nose and then also an orbital break. So he's not going to be back until next year in all likelihood. But once he is back, I'll definitely want to keep an eye on him. And then for Daukaus, whenever he's able to get back as well. After this performance against Brendan Allen, which was really impressive, I want to see how he does against some other guys in the division. Fight before that was Takashi Sato versus Jason Witt. Really good showing from Sato. It's kind of funny how leading into the fight, Bisping was talking about how his favorite combination is the 1-2 from southpaw, so the jab and then the cross, and was able to land it and drop Jason Witt with it. What I really liked about what he was able to do in this fight with that combination is that typically when you're drilling a 1-2 on the pads, you're just kind of like throwing the jab and then pulling that back in and then kind of pivoting into the cross, but your feet are set for the most part. They're just kind of pivoting. On this combination, he threw the jab, but then as Witt backed away, Sato then stepped in and then threw the cross. So it wasn't like a 1-2 where your feet are mostly stationary. It was a 1 chase him, or 1 step in to follow, and then 2, and then caught him on the end of the punch there, dropped him, and at that point, Witt was just hanging on for dear life, but Sato was able to land a few more big shots, put him down, had Witt turtled, and wasn't fully blocking, and was taking him a bunch of unanswered shots to the head, and the ref had to step in and stop it. Fight before that was Sean Woodson versus Julian Erosa. Really interesting looking fight. I don't know how the judges would have had this. Woodson was looking pretty good early. Erosa was taking some heavy shots to give his own, but it seemed like Woodson was definitely landing some snappier shots and some harder shots. But in the third round, Erosa was able to get Woodson down, gets in a front headlock position, goes for a Darce choke, and it looked like Woodson had a decent chance of getting out of it. It wasn't super tight initially, but Erosa was able to get his hands, or was able to close his grip on it, drag Woodson back to the mat, and then once he had him on the mat, turn him onto his side. Usually you want to grab you want to hook over top of the top leg. It looks like he was trying to hook the top leg and just missed it, but he was still able to catch the bottom leg and keep it in. And from that point, Woodson wasn't going anywhere, and that choke was only getting tighter. And it's one of those positions where even if the choke isn't 100% on, like the crank on the neck is super uncomfortable, and that can also force the tap. So he was able to force the tap there and get the win over the previously undefeated Sean Woodson. On the prelims, there was Luis Pena versus Kama Worthy. Pena was looking pretty good in this fight, especially in the second round. He was on Worthy's back for most of the time, was definitely dominating that round. Was getting a little bit tired, though, and in the third round, shot in on Worthy. Wasn't the best shot ever. Worthy defended it pretty well. Then kind of had like a bit of a desperation shot off it after that, where he sort of like ended up on his side, like on the side of his hip, rather than like driving straight forward. And during that transition, Worthy was able to sink in his arm into a high elbow guillotine position, where the arm in itself, like even without the second arm, like you can get a pretty tight squeeze just having it that deep already. But from there, he just dropped down, pushed his in a way, it's kind of like a Mackenzie Tina. It wasn't exactly a Mackenzie Tina. It's just like a high elbow guillotine, but it was sort of like a modified guillotine. I like to use that one a lot as well. But especially in MMA where you have the gloves on and that hand has a harder time of slipping out. That's just one of those chokes where if it gets stuck in the first place, like you're probably not getting out of it. And so Worthy was able to get the tap there. Initially, Pena tapped on the far side by the cage where the ref couldn't see it. Worthy was smart not to let go at that point because the ref wasn't stepping in, so he was telling the ref, hey, he's tapping, and then at that point, Pena then tapped with his left arm, which was towards the center of the cage and in the view of the ref, and at that point, the fight was over. Fight before that was Felipe Lins versus Tanner Boser. Boser was pretty aggressive throughout much of this fight. His hands looked pretty quick, especially for a heavyweight, but was able to land a nice combination. I believe it started with a 1-2, had Lins hurt, and then through like a 4 or 5 punch combination, was able to drop him, threw a huge back fist on the way down, and then at that point, Herb Dean had to jump in, pull him off of him, and there's like a funny picture going online where it looked almost like as Boser was getting thrown off the guy, it looked like Herb Dean was like DDTing him while Lins was just laying there unconscious. Fight before that was Kay Hansen versus Jin Hugh Frey. Decent showing for Kay Hansen. She's a 20-year-old purple belt out of Eddie Bravo school, or out of 10th Planet. She's kind of in this interesting position, and I guess a lot of women fighters are in a similar position. But it's one of those things that you kind of pay attention to is, it seems like, at least in the jiu-jitsu world, like girls who end up dating like high-level Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys, whether they end up marrying them or whether it's just like a dating thing, when they're around someone like that for a long period of time and they also are very interested in jiu-jitsu, they tend to get good really fast. And Kay Hansen is currently in a relationship with Keith Krikorian, who is an ADCC qualifier, one of the best up-and-comers for the 10th Planet team. And it seems as though, in addition to her really getting into the sport and really spending a lot of time to improve her game, it seems as though that's also helped her out a lot. So whenever this fight hit the mat, she was looking pretty good. Even though both were purple belts going into this fight, you could definitely tell that Hansen had the advantage on the ground. In the second round, when she was able to get Frey to the ground, and at least for the time that she was on top, was definitely winning from there. But in the third round, goes for sort of like a overhook Uchimata. Doesn't get the throw off of it, but kept that whizzer, jumped over top for an armbar. Ended up in what's called the spiderweb position, at least in EBI, which is like that armbar position where you're on top and off to the side. And from there, what I thought was kind of funny is that the boyfriend who I just mentioned, Keith Krikorian, recently put out a DVD on EBI overtime positions, and in EBI overtime you have it where you're on the guy's back, and you have it where you have that spiderweb position. So there she was, like right in one of those EBI overtime positions, and definitely played it perfectly. Was able to pull on the arm enough to create some space underneath where she can switch it into a triangle. From there, it just kind of becomes a matter of personal preference in terms of how you want to get the finish there. AJ Agazarm, for example, was in that same position against Adele Altamani in his last fight, and he put the triangle in, but then from there he grabbed the far shoulder. So if the right arm is in on the triangle, the left arm's out, he would grab at the left elbow and pull that in, and it puts pressure on the shoulder, but also makes the choke tight. So that's his way of doing it. I kind of prefer that way as well, but you can also go for an armbar if that's your preference, and it seems as though that was Kay Hansen's preference from there. So she kept the triangle on, got the arm out, put the wrist underneath her armpit, sort of like how Mackenzie Dern finished the knee bar. Same sort of mechanic, and then was able to hip in and get enough pressure on the elbow to get the tap. And then the first fight on the card was Yusuf Zalal versus Jordan Griffin. All three judges scored a 29-28 for Zalal. Pretty good fight for the most part. Zalal was winning the fight on the feet, definitely outstruck Griffin. Griffin was able to get some takedowns in as well in order for him to get around, but Zalal had done enough there to get the win. So that covers it for that card. Next topic to talk about is going to be Mike Perry and his corner situation. So there are a lot of takes that I'm seeing online on this. Some of them are just jokes because it was just a funny situation all around where he's going in and all he has is his girlfriend, who obviously doesn't know a whole lot. You see the video of her holding pads for him. It's kind of funny. You see the video of them in the corner where she's just like, "Oh, you're doing great, babe. Like, this is great. Good job, babe." Like, those are her tips rather than saying anything more beyond that. So it was definitely kind of funny in that way. But he did get the win, and there's this talk. Well, it's like, oh, maybe that's not a bad idea. Like, maybe the corners don't do that much, and maybe it's not worth paying him 20%. It is worth mentioning that when you're paying your corner, first off, you're paying your corner 20%, they're asking for way too much. 10% is more in line of what it should be, and some will do even less than that. But beyond that, your corner isn't just ignoring you for the entirety of camp and then like traveling out there the week of, sitting in the sauna with you and then coaching you throughout a fight. Like your corner is going to be there the entire time as you're preparing for the fight. So the 15 minutes that you're in the octagon, though that is a very important part of their job, it's definitely not the only important part of their job, and what they do in the gym is also incredibly important. So to make it sound like if you keep them out of your corner, that you're going to save a bunch of money. I don't know if that's the case. You should definitely still be paying your coaches if you're training with your coaches during camp, and you might as well have them in your corner anyway. As far as what a corner's job is, I mean, there's a bunch of jobs of a corner. There's the obvious part where they're actually giving their fighter advice. So if they see an opening that the fighter might not see, say, just kind of like alerting them to that. But there's also other aspects of cornering that are involved there that a corner can do that a fighter inside of the cage cannot do at the time. In addition to seeing some things that the fighter might not see, one aspect of it is that a corner, the advice that you're giving, sometimes you're giving advice to your fighter, and sometimes you're fucking around with your fighter's opponent under the guise of giving advice. So an example of that would be, let's say that the guy who my fighter is going up against is really trying to set up a high kick or something to that effect, and they're trying to lead with it. If I say something like, you know he's going to lead with that high kick, or you know he's going to lead with X, or you know he's going to go for this specific takedown at this specific time, when you say things like that, there's a good chance you probably already told your fighter that, and there's a good chance your fighter probably already knows that. But when you say that, it seems as though you're telling him, hey, watch out for it, when in reality what you're doing is you're making sure that the opponent can hear him and saying, hey, I know what you're trying to do. We've probably got a little plan for it, so if you think you're going to go ahead and get away with it, maybe not the best idea. So there's that aspect to it where that kind of function can be performed by a corner, but it can't really be performed by a fighter. I mean, I guess some fighters will be like, I know what you're trying to do, and they'll like talk to their opponent, but that's not really all that common. Whereas the cornerman, while the fighter's paying attention to fighting, the cornerman can sort of plant some seeds like that in the opponent's head and make them think before they do what they actually want to do. On top of that, you're also, in a way, trying to work the refs, and especially in the Apex now, where the judges can hear everything, and pretty much everyone inside the Apex can hear everything. You're also playing to the judges a little bit. So let's just say that it's a relatively close round, and maybe I don't actually think my fighters won it to this point, but it's pretty close. If I were to say something to the effect of, all right, we got about 30 seconds here, I need you to try to get a takedown to, not to steal the round, but I need you to do it to solidify the round, or you're winning this, just get a takedown to solidify. Saying things like that, like you're winning this round, or we just need to do this to solidify what you've already done. What you're effectively doing is you're kind of saying, like, especially for the coaches who have really high pedigrees, you're effectively saying to the judges, like, hey, just so you know who's winning this round, it's our guy. But by the way, I'm now going to offer advice to our guy that makes it sound like I'm not actually talking specifically to you judges. Here's how you can make sure you definitely get the round. So in addition to telling fighters specific technical advice and finding openings for them, there's definitely some gamesmanship to being in a corner where you can kind of play with the opponent, you can play with the judges, you can play with the refs, and not having a corner, not having a competent corner takes that away from you. And if you're in a position where you don't have a competent corner and the other team does, and they're doing all that and you're not, it can definitely feel a little lonely out there. It can feel a little weird out there. Now, granted, in this specific case, Perry was the better fighter than Gall. Now, this fight was closer than I expected it to be, but still, Perry was the better fighter, and he was able to get the win. But in terms of this being a long-term solution, I just don't see that. We're lucky that this was a fight where Perry was the much better fighter than Gall. Had Latore Gonzalez had to been cornering Max Rohskopf, for example, could we imagine how that corner work would have been? Like, that would have been really bad. Had this been a more difficult fight, could you imagine how the cornering would work? Like, that'd probably be really bad. I just think in this case, it worked out for Mike Perry because of who he was fighting. But in this case, things were going well for him. But if things aren't going well, it's good to have a competent corner in there, especially one who knows exactly what's happening and when to throw in the towel if they have to. But it's also good to have a competent corner that's going to be able to play some of the other minor games in there, whether it's with the refs, whether it's with the judges, whether it's with the opponent, and just having a corner who says absolutely nothing except for "you're doing great, babe" in between rounds. It's definitely not the best situation for you, and you're definitely going to find yourself feeling a little bit uncomfortable out there if you're in a close fight and you got like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion and a kickboxing world champion in your opponent's corner, and in your corner you're hearing nothing other than "good job, babe, keep it up." Like, it's just not the best long-term solution. So while it was pretty funny for the time being, while it definitely made for some great stories, if you're actually thinking that this is an idea that more fighters should take up, that they should have girlfriends or wives or just no one in their corner, I definitely would not take that approach. I guess another thing to mention with Perry is that he had his post-fight interview that was pretty entertaining. He was talking about taxes and how he was getting killed on taxes. It sounds as though there's some options that fighters have in terms of like setting up LLCs or setting up like a private company and having the money funneled in through there, and that'll give them tax breaks on it. I'm definitely not a tax expert, so I'm not sure if that's the best option for them, but it does seem as though there are ways that they can reduce taxes. But it was kind of interesting to hear him talk about how upset he was with the government taking away all his money in taxes, and it was kind of entertaining. All right, next topic to talk about is going to be Don House, the Cutman, who's wearing a couple of different Q patches. So Q, it's not something I follow closely, but it's something that I'm just relatively aware of. There's like this QAnon movement that seems to be pretty popular among the right wing. My understanding of it, and I could be really wrong about this, and please correct me in the comments if I am wrong. My understanding of what Q comes from is that within the government there's something that's referred to as a deep state. Some people call deep state a conspiracy. Deep state's just another way to talk about people who are in positions of power that weren't really elected to be there. So, for example, an FBI agent or someone who's like high up in the FBI, it's not as though there was like a national election to pick them in there and everyone knew what their resumes were and decided to put them in there. Like, it's just unelected people who are in high positions that can definitely have major effects on how the country is run. So for Trump, it sounds as though a lot of the people in the deep state are against him, and he's made that clear. But I think the idea of Q is that QAnon is like an anonymous feed from some of the people who are in that deep state who are pro-Trump and who are actually trying to accomplish things that Trump and his base want to see done. So the idea there is that they are communicating with people online and doing so under like the banner Q, or like the nickname Q, like anonymous Q or something like that. But there have been people who haven't liked the whole idea of QAnon, and they call it a conspiracy. They say that the stuff that QAnon shares is conspiracies. I couldn't tell you whether or not that's the case. By making it anonymous, obviously I could make something anonymous and claim to be something I'm not. And if I'm telling people something they want to believe, I'm sure there are going to be people who believe it. With that being said, if I was telling the truth and doing it under the anonymous name, that could also be a similar situation. So I don't really know whether or not QAnon is legit or not, but that's really beside the point. But Don House had a patch that just had the letter Q on it, and he also had something on his sleeve that said, it was like a 7-letter/number acronym. I think it was like WWG1 WGA. I think it's like where we go one, we go all, or something to that effect. And Kareem Zidane of Bloody Elbow, who is just an absolute trash reporter and uses his role as a reporter to try to pressure businesses to do things that he wants, and thankfully the UFC doesn't really bow to him all that much. I'm not sure whether or not they're going to in this case, but he was trying to get Don House in hot water for this and get him in trouble. And it wasn't like, hey, could you tell me more about it? It's more like, hey, I've like done my research. This guy is sharing conspiracy theories. What say you? Like, do you support this? Do you defend this? And the UFC put out a statement saying that they don't really support it and they're going to look into it. I don't know where they're at with it right now in terms of what they're going to do to Don House. As far as I'm concerned, with these uniforms, I think there is a pretty clear policy that you're not supposed to have your own like personal messages on it. So if Don House gets in trouble for having the Q messages on it, am I going to be that upset? I can't say that I'm going to be too upset. I guess to me, what I'd like to see is that if he is going to get in trouble, I would like to imagine that whatever trouble he gets in for wearing a QAnon patch would be equal to the trouble that he'd get in had he worn a patch that was for a separate political movement. So maybe he had like a Black Lives Matter patch. Like, imagine that. Let's just say that he gets like banned from the UFC for good. Would I think that he would have gotten banned from the UFC for good had he had a Black Lives Matter patch? Probably not. So in that case, if that's what the response is, then it definitely seems like a wrong response. But to me, he's got a uniform. Like, they have pretty straightforward rules on what you can and can't have on that. And if he's breaking those rules and knowingly doing so, then the UFC is within their right to punish him to some extent. I don't know what extent that is, but if he doesn't get off scot-free, it's not going to be too upset and feel like the UFC is like persecuting him or anything. But with that being said, I would be interested to see how severe their response is. It was also interesting that the ESPN article on it by Mark Ramundi, it's this like really Weasley journalism thing that's been going on a lot lately. But it wasn't even like honest either. But he was, when he was trying to describe like what QAnon is, he was saying that like QAnon is a conspiracy theory that suggests that people in high places are trying to work against Donald Trump, and that there's like a pedophile ring out there, and he's saying both of which have no evidence supporting them. It's kind of like, look, if you don't agree with Q, that's one thing, but if you're going to say there's no evidence supporting the idea of there being like a pedophile ring out there that major elites are involved in, like we just had this whole thing with Jeffrey Epstein. Like, to say that there's no evidence that pedophile rings exist with high-level people or elites or whatever you want to refer to them as, I just don't know how you can put that in an article and like think that you did a good job. But for whatever reason, that was a line that was included in there, and it definitely got ripped on a lot by the people who read it. So I think he got deservedly ripped for that. But either way, as far as where they go from here, don't expect to see Don House wearing anything QA non-related in the future. But whether or not he gets removed from the UFC, I'm not sure where they're going to go with that. But it'll be interesting to see. It's possible that the fact that we haven't heard a conclusion to this at this point just means that the UFC is just letting it die underneath the news cycle, and we're just going to pretend it didn't happen and nothing's really going to happen. And if they get asked, then they'll just say, oh, well, we took care of it in-house or something like that, which is perfectly fine. But I would hope that Don House doesn't get the boot here and get kicked out, because he's a very good cornerman. He's been a really good cornerman for a long, or not cornerman, cutman. He's been a really good cutman for a long time, and it just doesn't seem like it would be right to just completely cut him off. If you suspend him for a little bit, maybe like take him off a card or something, then okay, whatever. But anything beyond that seems a little bit excessive. Next topic to talk about is going to be Geoff Neal and his little story on Fighter Pay. So he was doing an interview with James Lynch, and in that interview he was saying that the steakhouse he used to work at, or the restaurant he used to work at, they were short-staffed, and so he decided to go back to work there during the whole COVID shutdown situation. And that story got picked up by BJPenn.com and some other places, and they were like, oh my God, like Geoff Neal, he's ranked number 11 at welterweight. He hasn't gotten a fight this year. This is the UFC's fault. Like, the UFC underpays their fighters so bad that a guy who's top 15 in the world has to work at a restaurant. Like, what the hell is going on right now? To be clear, and this was a mistake I made initially, so I saw the headline initially, and my first thought wasn't like, okay, well, let's like go through the entire interview, listen to it, and see exactly what he meant when he said that. I was just like, okay, well, this seems weird. Let me see how much Geoff Neal makes and whether or not it's reasonable that he would have to work at a restaurant. And over the course of last year, at least in disclosed pay, he made over $200K. His last fight against Mike Perry, which was in December, he made over $60K. So at least from that standpoint, it would be safe to say, assuming you didn't know anything more about Geoff Neal's specific situation, that if he had, and had is the key word, if he had to go back to work, that wouldn't be a UFC fighter pay issue. That would be a personal finance issue. Now, what I ended up missing in that is that in the interview, Geoff Neal never said that it was something that he had to do. It was just one of those things where he had a good relationship with the people he worked with. They were short-staffed. They needed help. He was available because he wasn't fighting. So he's like, you know what, sure, I'll come in and help you. But it's not as though he needed the money that he was making there to pay the bills. It was just one of those things where he was helping out people that he liked and had worked with in the past. So this idea that Geoff Neal is being forced to work at a restaurant, financially forced to because the UFC isn't paying him enough, that's not true. Not only is it not true because the UFC paid him over $200,000 last year, but it's also not true because that wasn't actually what brought him back. It was just him trying to help out some people that he cared for, and that's something that he chose to do. And on top of that, I guess some of the responses I got to that tweet were people saying, "Oh yeah, well, a fighter might make $200,000 top line, but how about taxes? How about all the other fees they have to pay? Even after all the other fees you have to pay, like." Even if you ended up with a quarter of that $200,000, even if you ended up with $50,000 take-home pay, which again, if you're making $50,000 a year in a normal job, your take-home pay is not $50,000. Like, if it's like low 40, I mean, I guess it depends on what state you're in. If you have no state taxes, that's going to be a lot better for you than if you do have state taxes. But still, your take-home pay is not even going to be $50,000 if you're making $50,000. So for him, if his take-home pay is $50,000, that's still more than enough to live on, especially in Texas where there aren't state taxes. So for him, that wouldn't have been a problem. It wouldn't have been a reasonable excuse to say that he's underpaid or that he's like not paid enough to make a living wage. But again, it's important to note that in this specific case, he's returning to work at a restaurant not because he has to, but because he chose to. Next topic is Max Rohskopf. So he had a 30-minute interview with Mike Heck of MMA Fighting that I listened to. He also, or his cornerman Robert Drysdale also had an interview with Ariel Helwani. Seems as though for Max, it was kind of tough to listen to the interview because it seemed like there was a much bigger issue at play for him that he was talking about. He was saying that he's used to being a really high-level wrestler in high school, but he wasn't ever like a state champion. That he was always, and there were some of the best guys in college, but whenever it came time for the big tournament, couldn't make it to the All-American stand. And he was kind of saying that he feels like that's sort of a problem for him right now, is that even in the UFC or even in MMA where when he's in the room, he feels like he can hang with some of the best guys in the world and even beat some of the best guys in the world and even finish them and catch them in submissions. That when he's actually in the cage and he starts facing adversity, that he sort of folds. And it was interesting to hear him admit that. I think for him, he is 25 right now. Like I mentioned, at least from a skill standpoint, he's at a very good spot right now, but he's got a lot of room to grow, and he's a guy who can be a really good prospect. So it was interesting to hear him say what he said there. I think for him, I don't know that he's making enough money right now where he can afford to like pay a top level sports psychologist. But if you are like at a lower, like if you're a student in sports psychology or something like that, or maybe you just started a practice of sports psychology, he might be the type of guy you want to reach out to and say, hey, look, like let's see what I can do to help you out here. If this works out really well for you, then I guess that works out well for me. Then I could say I was the guy who helped bring Max Rohskopf to the next level. But it definitely sounds like a sports psychologist is something that he's going to need. He didn't sound like he was too upset with Robert Drysdale either. He sounded pretty appreciative of him, both in terms of him taking him in and getting him to the point where he got to the UFC, but then also him trying to push him forward in that fight. And he was saying, look, if I was cornering someone else, I would have done the exact same thing that Drysdale did. So that was definitely interesting, because sometimes when you have certain moments with coaches, sometimes you hit a breaking point with a coach over something, and then at that point you just never really want to go back. And that really wasn't the case with him right there. It's never been in martial arts, but I've had a case back when I was playing college tennis where I kind of hit like a breaking point with a coach, and at that point I never really trusted him again and really didn't want to move forward with him. You see that in MMA sometimes too. And I was kind of wondering if that would be the case here with Drysdale and Rohskopf, but it doesn't sound like that is the case. I think Max is still pretty tight with Drysdale and still trusts him and still wants to have him as his coach moving forward. So that's a good thing. As far as my specific case, that was just a situation where I was really banged up, didn't have to play a match, but then just kind of got pushed into a match that I didn't have any desire to play just because I had 2 sprained hamstrings, so both of my hamstrings are sprained, which is very tough in tennis because you have to move laterally, and having sprained hamstrings makes that tough. Was kind of in a spot where I didn't have to play that match because I had a week between matches and at least had some time to heal up. The team that we were playing against in college tennis, sometimes you don't have like a full team, and then at that point you just kind of have to like walk out of the court, pretend you're going to play, and then you get the default win. So he could have like adjusted the lineup where I would have gotten the default win there, not had to play, but instead like made it his mission to like put me in there, and I was not particularly happy about that. So it's not as though that's like the exact same type of a situation with Max, where Max didn't want to be in there, got pushed in there, or got pushed. I guess in my case actually to go out there and play the match, so that might have made things a little bit different. But I guess if I'm going to mention it, I might as well be a little bit more specific. Next topic is college wrestling related. So it's a lot of guys have been either transferring or making some other major decisions. I think the biggest weight class that this has affected has been 133 pounds. So there was a top recruit a couple of years ago named Gavin Teasdale who had committed to Iowa. There was a lot of excitement about him and Spencer Lee like being a 1-2 punch at 125 and 133. Then Teasdale decommitted, went to Penn State. Wasn't ever able to wrestle for Penn State, had some issues there on campus. Not exactly sure if it was partying related, grades related, or what it was. But ends up leaving Penn State, transfers back to Iowa, and then last year was at Iowa. Didn't wrestle on the varsity squad, but did have some unattached tournaments he was in. Wrestled at Midlands, did okay, but wasn't as good as you would have expected for a guy who was a blue chip recruit. But he put his name in the transfer portal, so it's looking like he's going to be leaving Iowa. For Iowa, I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a guy like him on the roster, but with that being said, he's not going to beat out DeSanto. I think Iowa's looking at some other guys for 133 once DeSanto graduates as well, so for them, probably isn't going to affect them too badly, but still a bit of a loss. There was an undefeated guy who I believe was seeded number 3 from Cornell named Charles Tucker, or Chaz Tucker. He graduated college, still had a year of eligibility left, but decided that he'd rather just get into coaching, so he is going to be entering the transfer portal and will not be returning for Cornell, which is a bit of a hit for Cornell in that with the guys they're getting back off of Olympic redshirts, they're going to have a decent chance to be a top 3 team, if not even contend for the title next year, and losing Tucker is definitely going to hurt them, so that's a pretty big story there. But the biggest one is going to be the guy who won Big Tens last year and was expected to have a really good shot at winning the national title at 133, and that's Sebastian Rivera. Graduated from Northwestern, still has a year of eligibility left, decided that rather than staying around in Evanston, Illinois, that he would be going back home to New Jersey and will wrestle his final year at Rutgers. So Rutgers is going to have a very strong team next year, assuming Nick Soriano comes back, with Soriano and Sebastian Rivera at 125 and 133. It'll be interesting to see who takes what weight class. Both have wrestled at 125 in the past. Both have wrestled at 133 in the past. I don't know that either of them is going to be making 125, especially not Rivera. Rivera's looked pretty big over the course of the summer. Maybe he bumps up to 141, but that's definitely going to be a really big story there. And Rivera's a guy who's talked a lot about getting into MMA after he's done with wrestling. Has worked with Frank Yeager a lot, and it seems like with him being at Rutgers, he's probably going to spend a little bit more time with him as well. Be a lot closer to what he considers his home camp for MMA, and once he graduates college, if all goes as planned, which, I mean, for him, he is a degree from Northwestern. I don't know how close he is to getting an advanced degree, whether or not he's going to do that at Rutgers, if he's just going to do enough coursework to stay eligible, but it's not as though he's going to have to get into MMA if he wants to make a living, but it seems as though that's something that he's pretty excited about, and going to Rutgers is not going to hurt at all. It's probably going to help him a lot in terms of preparing him for that next step in his career, which would be going over to MMA. Next topic to talk about is what eventually will be a transfer, but at this point we just know that people are leaving, and that's the Miyao brothers leaving Unity Jiu-Jitsu. So Unity is a Cicero Costa affiliate that is based out of New York. I believe it was initially started by Paulo Miyao and Murilo Santana. For whatever reason, I believe that there was a big disagreement that led to this. But for whatever reason it is, both Miyao brothers are now leaving Unity, which is pretty surprising. What's most interesting to me about this is that both Paulo and Joao, but on top of that, the Cicero Costa team, they always seem to put out the best guys at the low weights, especially light featherweight. And I believe the last year we had Worlds in 2019, it was all four semifinalists were all Cicero Costa guys, so there wasn't even like a single match between the semifinals and the finals. Like, they just had them like bow out to each other up until the championship. So there weren't actually like actual matches they're playing out. So if these guys leave and they create a new affiliation, they join a different affiliation that's not related to Cicero Costa, that could definitely make some matchups, make for some really interesting matchups at Worlds in the future at the light featherweight division. At the very least, we're not going to have people bowing out in the semifinals. Maybe they'll still bow out in the finals if you have two Cicero Costa guys reach the finals, or if you have both Miyao brothers reach the finals. But it could definitely make things more exciting at those lighter weights, assuming that they are not still with Cicero Costa. I don't know if their issue stems specifically with like Murilo Santana and the people at Unity itself, or whether their issue is with the affiliation as a whole, but that's going to be a story to follow that could have a pretty big effect on the lighter weight divisions at the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championships moving forward. And then the last topic to talk about is going to be some Jiu-Jitsu results. So like I mentioned, in a fight to win, Gary Tonin had a match with Osvaldo Quixinho. Quixinho just dominated AJ Agazarm in the gi, multiple-time black belt world champion. Looked really good in that match. Was going against Gary Tonin. Tonin was giving him some trouble early on. Was pretty aggressive, and was able to catch a really nice backstep entry into an inside Senkaku or inside triangle position, reaping the knee. And then from there was able to snatch on a heel hook, and didn't take long before he started cranking out to get the finish there to get the win. So for Gary Tonin, I'm not sure when he's going to be able to return to ONE FC and get the shot at that title that he was talking about. But he is staying active in the grappling world. He was active in ADCC. He's been active recently as well. So it's nice to see him continue to be active and continue to go against some of the best guys in the world and get some really nice performances here, including a win over Quixinho by submission. The other big tournament was another third Coast Grappling Kumite. This was their third one. First round had a really exciting match between Ty Ruotolo versus Roberto Jimenez. Ruotolo is coming off of a win over Nicky Ryan. Much smaller guy than Jimenez is, but still a really good kid. I think he's like 18 years old right now, is growing into his frame, getting bigger as time goes on, but has tremendous guard passing, really good from top, but also really good from bottom as well. But Jimenez was able to get the win here during overtime by golden score. I was able to take his back in overtime. Next fight was John Combs versus Pierre Olivier Leclerc. Combs just dominated this match, was able to win by technical fall by a score of 13-2. Tech falls aren't a normal thing in Jiu-Jitsu, but in this particular tournament they had it. Next match was Vagner Hosha versus Cody Steele. Sort of surprising in how Hosha was able to get the win here by getting it by takedown. Cody Steele, very good. I think he's gotten his black belt now, but was in a very high-level brown belt. Was a combat jiu-jitsu world champion. Known for having really good wrestling on top of his jiu-jitsu, really aggressive. So you kind of figured that if this fight was going to be decided on the feet, that Cody Steele might be able to get the win there and steal it, so to speak. But Vagner was actually able to take him down and win by golden score. And the last quarterfinal round, or first round quarterfinal, it was just 8 people, so same thing, was Pedro Moreno versus Johnny Tama. For whatever reason, Moreno just keeps catching people with guillotines in positions where, like, when you watch it, like, he'll have it in deep, and then he'll still have like the front headlock position, but it won't be as deep. And for whatever reason, rather than addressing the front headlock, his opponents will just like keep driving into him and like trying to escape kind of like a more traditional way where you get a takedown but then land on the side rather than just like clearing the headlock and just resetting. So for whatever reason, Tama was able to stay out of danger for the most part early. Had a little bit of space rather than just trying to back out and reset. Just kept driving into Marino. Marino was able to tighten up the guillotine and get the finish there. So even though Pedro is much bigger than Johnny Tama, it was still a big win for him. At brown belt, he's been an elite guy, ADCC qualifier, though he did lose to Gordon Ryan in the absolute after talking a lot of crap online. But still really, really tough guy. Johnny Tama, black belt world champion at lightweight. So Marino definitely had the size on him. But Tama had probably a little bit better of a pedigree, but still big win for Marino. In the semis, there was Roberto Jimenez versus John Combs in the first semi. Jimenez was able to win this fight. Was able to catch him by an armbar. And then in the other semifinal, Vagner Rocha versus Pedro Marino. Rocha also undersized compared to Pedro, but Rocha was able to get the win here and did so by a golden score at the end by going for a takedown that ended up going out of bounds. In the finals, you had Vagner versus Roberto Jimenez. And Roberto Jimenez, though he had a bit of a disappointing loss at Submission Underground to Mason Fowler, was able to get the win here against Vagner Rocha, who arguably would be a little bit more difficult of an opponent. Now, granted, Fowler's a bigger guy and a lot more explosive of an athlete, but still really dangerous guy. ADCC silver medalist this year, ended up losing to JT Torres in the finals. But Jimenez was able to get this win by referee decision and win $10,000 and that Kumite. I think one of the most interesting things to me, though, is that there's talk of the winner of this tournament getting a shot at Gordon Ryan, and so there's the idea of Jimenez versus Gordon Ryan. There was actually some footage put out a year ago of Roberto Jimenez rolling with Gordon Ryan, and this was after Roberto Jimenez won his weight and absolute at purple belt, submitting everyone on the way to do it, which is incredibly rare. And him rolling with Gordon Ryan was just shocking in terms of how dominant Gordon Ryan was in that role. Now, granted, it's a role in the gym. It's not as though they were competing against each other, but still, the way Gordon Ryan was just kind of doing whatever he wanted to was shocking. And if they do have a match, I'd be curious to see if that looks exactly like the role that I watched or whether this is going to be a much different situation and maybe Jimenez just turns it on more in the actual match and is able to make it competitive. But either way, still really exciting and a lot of good action there. So next week there won't be a UFC, so there won't be any UFC to recap. There will be UFC 251 to preview, so I'll definitely be talking about that. Not sure that there are going to be a ton of big stories that are going to continue on from there. I know last week I talked about how the Rohskopf story would likely have some more updates on that. As far as this week's stories, not sure if there are any big ones, but I'm sure some new stuff will come up. There might be some other big transfers in wrestling. Maybe we'll learn more about where the Miyaos go. Maybe they'll announce their new spot. So I'm sure some other news will pop up, and whatever comes up, I'll be sure to talk about it. But definitely we'll be spending much of next week previewing UFC 251 and the 3 title fights that are going to be on that main card.